We're starting early, are we?
We're late.
Oh, no, it hasn't run out. There is none. Are we live streaming this? Are we live streaming? Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this long-term plan open briefing. I'll pass over to Mark.
Great. Thank you, Your Worship. Good afternoon, everyone. This is our public briefing number 3, where we're taking you through sort of the draft budgets on year 1 for OPEX and years 1 to 3 for CapEx. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, slightly shorter public briefing today, 3 hours as opposed to 4. So not as much to get through today. So first of all, we'll just recap what we discussed last week, both sessions, the 7th and 9th of November. We did actually detail the Capital Works program, the details of that last Thursday, and there were a couple of questions that were raised as we went through the details. So we've got responses to take you through. Then we would like to table what's included in year 1 for economic development initiatives. Then we'll touch on some key considerations of the financial strategy. That's still a work in progress. It's still being developed, but we'd just like to just outline some think tank concepts for the financial strategy. And then, as always, we'll finish the session with the key takeouts of today, and then we'll let you know what's coming up on Thursday. So, as always, please do ask questions as we go. But if we could keep questions to the slides that we're on, would be really helpful. And we should be done and dusted by 3:30 this afternoon. So just to recap what we presented to you last week. So at the moment, for year 1 of the long-term plan, so that's the 24-25 financial year, the draft rates increase is sitting at 12%. Options to reduce that further or to 8.86% are ongoing. So we're working on that. The Chief Executive, to get to 12%, the Chief Executive imposed a reduction to future staff growth. So staff numbers were kept at 436. That's where we anticipate staffing levels will be at as at 30th of June 2024. So we'll cap that as part of year 1 of the long-term plan, whereas previously we had included in the budgets a staff level of 452. We did apply a vacancy loading, and the result of our personnel increase in rates was 1.1%. Normally that's well over 3%. So that staff cap plus the vacancy loading certainly contained average rates increases. We talked to you about depreciation. As we know, depreciation is a key building block of the rates increases. With CapEx costs increasing substantially, plus our revaluations year on year, depreciation went up. But what we've proposed or put on the table is a 5.1% reduction to depreciation by increasing the non-rates funded depreciation for wastewater and stormwater of $4.7 million. That's because of the Affordable Waters. We'll debt fund that with the expectation that we will receive that debt back from the Crown. New budget bids, so this is where the council officers have identified they do need more OPEX funding for various reasons. We categorised that, and what we've included in the 12% is a $2 million uplift for our OPEX budgets, and the details of that were provided last week. Those were at $5 million at first. When it was first presented to our Chief Executive, they were at 5, so they've been reduced down to 2 million. Year 1 capital works program, we've estimated with the carryovers and what we plan to do, that budget starting point was at 105 million. We did hear loud and clearly that you wanted our budget set at what we could deliver. So they've been now reduced to 71 million for year 1 of the LTP, 71 million for year 2 of the LTP, and currently at 99 million in year 3. That does reflect deliverability. We then took you through the details of that capital works program across 1 to 3, and as I said, some questions were raised and we've got responses to those questions which we'll take you through a little bit later. We did stress to the table that by reducing from 105 to 71 million, that was a crude way in which we did it. We literally took 33% off every single project in the capital works program. And we spoke to you about a proposal to manage our capital works, the budgets for the capital works program, and do it differently. Manage the budget in total, recognising that when you take 33% off every single project, it's highly likely that some of the projects will be under budgeted. So what we proposed is the ability to be able to manage within the $71 million, but be able to move the budgets around so that the budget sits where the cost increases are, so that we've got enough budget for the projects. And that was well received, so we will develop that further. We have presented, so our councillors did a workshop and our community boards did a workshop, and through those workshops they identified some new initiatives to potentially be included in the long-term plan. So we did present those to the table, and we noted that there's still work to be done with those. They're not currently included in the 12% draft rates increase. However, work is going to be done. We got a clear steer. 2 of the councillor initiatives were removed from the table, and those will be presented back to you on the 28th of November. We also tabled a potential option to reduce rates below 12% by holding the insurance premium at our current level. We went through some details on insurance, but the general steer of the table was at this particular point in time not to utilise that. So we've included a 20% increase for the insurance premiums, which is in the 12%. But noting that officers are doing a lot more work in insurance, that work will be brought back to the table to Council in February or March next year. And those recommendations may well lead to opportunities to reduce the budget. So the decision was to include the increase in insurance and premium in the 12%. So we took you through the new budget initiatives, so that did total $2 million. We went through this line by line on Thursday, but the slide is just a recap. So we've got what we initially requested. So staff initially requested $3 million. Well, originally it was over $5 million, but what we honed in on was the absolute necessities, which were 3, which were further reduced down to 2. And that sits mainly in infrastructure and the community services space. So the details are behind me. Just very quickly, it was additional funding for roading, and Sean Mellon did note that there is a risk of, obviously, we're not including the full cost of the road maintenance, which means less road maintenance will be done if it's held at 610. Plus some wastewater pH correction work, Mahara Gallery funding, noting that that's been looked at further, and then some other bits and bobs to get to the whole 2 million. And the steer from the table was generally comfort with that extra $2 million. I think we have a question, Janet.
Do we get an opportunity to revise this list? Because I'm still struggling with the $500,000 for Mahara Gallery, and I can't remember when we voted that was a priority. And so when do we revisit this, or don't we?
Oh, so we haven't voted on anything yet. The Mahara, this isn't a final list of things we're definitely going to do. This is still a work in progress, and there's a briefing next week from Mahara Gallery and staff, which will take us through the options around that and how that figure was arrived at. So I suggest that we put that on hold until councillors have all that information. Is that okay? If there's anything else you've got a problem with on that list, it's probably good to know about it now so that staff can come back with more information or we can have further discussion. Was there anything else for you, Shelley?
I think I've already said about the tracks and trails and the lack of funding for that, but Mark's aware of that.
So where do you think we're up to with that, Mike? Because that it said under review based on feedback from Climate and Environment Subcommittee, so that's still in progress as well. But I'll let Mike respond.
Thanks, Tara. So we have the asset management plan coming to soft tomorrow, Thursday, on tracks and trails. Councillor Warwick and I just had a lengthy discussion about this this morning. The issue is the key thing we need to before we can kind of make much progress at all with tracks and trails is to establish the vehicle by which we are going to deliver stuff. And that vehicle most likely is going to be a trust, but we haven't yet figured out how we're going to do it or actually received any legal advice about how we might set up a trust. So we would like to come back to you with some advice on how we might set up a trust before we start trying to plug money into the long-term plan process. Bearing in mind my advice from last time is that only 7 of the 31 trails are actually owned by us. So I think it'll be premature for us to try and design a budget around assets that we don't actually own ourselves, especially while we haven't actually figured out what the delivery vehicle is going to be. I think we're aligned with our aspiration and where we want to go. It's just how we get it, and we certainly sense the councillor desire for us to get cracking on this. So I'm sure that will come up tonight at the CWB advisory group as well.
Mike, while I've got you there, I'm sure I thought there was a Mahara Gallery briefing next week, but we're not seeing it anymore. What's happening there?
21st of November. I think the invitation might be imminent. We are getting a little bit of some of the board members aren't available, so there's just a wee bit of uncertainty around that. But there should be an Outlook entry coming through shortly for the afternoon of the 21st.
Brilliant. Okay. Yeah, that afternoon's starting to fill up, so we might want to get that in. It's really important that that happens sooner rather than later. Who have we got next? Martin? Oh no, Glenn.
Just back on Mahara Gallery, I'm not sure who's doing that review. I'm assuming it's our staff. I just have a request in that briefing if door counts are available. I think it's quite important in terms of for me to make a decision on where this lands in terms of do they count door count, and if so, can we have that in the report so we know how many people it's actually tracking?
I can answer that, Mike. They have before the renovation, their yearly reports included visitor numbers. So that's all reported on as part of their reporting back on their funding that they already get from council. And they do have some figures post renovation too, which are pretty outstanding actually, from what I've heard.
Awesome. Thank you.
Do you have anything to add to that, Mike? No. Thanks. Martin?
Yeah, look, just a little clarity more than anything else. The State Highway 1 revocation, am I picking that there's 1.6 million in required work and we're getting 990,000 from NZTA to do that, and that's why that's a deduction on the right-hand side?
I don't know the answer to that. I'll look to Sean. We'll just wait for his microphone. Sean?
Thank you. So no, there's a combination of increases within the transport sector that make up the 1.6 million. And one of them is the extra length of road we get as part of revocation, but there are other cost escalations and other issues in there in terms of what's driving that number. What's proposed is that there's a decrease of $990,000 from that 1.6, and we would receive 600,000. So we covered off a little bit of that detail at the last session, but that's where it's currently sitting.
Did you want to?
Oh, that's fine.
Great. Jocelyn?
Yeah, thank you. So I've got a couple of questions. So this page is on OPEX. I'm just wondering, particularly with the trails and tracks and trails maintenance and the coastal restoration planting, how that actually works in relation to OPEX as opposed to CAPEX.
Thank you. So in terms of the coastal restoration and planting, so that's just literally planting. It's not CAPEX. In terms of plants, we can capitalise plants when it's part of a facility, when it's part of an asset. So in other words, landscaping. So when you build a library and you do landscaping outside, the plants are an integral part of the asset. When we're just doing coastal planting and restoration, it's not deemed to be CAPEX. It's you have to OPEX it under the accounting standards.
Okay, thank you. And tracks and trails?
I think tracks and trails, as Mike said, only 7 of the trails that we actually we own. It depends whether you're building a new trail, you can capitalise or maintain. But I think Mike's going to add to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mark. So that actually represents what it costs for us to maintain the tracks that we do actually own. So for the Waikanae River Trail, for example, is the main one. That's roughly what it costs us each year just to keep that thing open because of all the additional work we have to do with flooding and damage to that trail.
Thank you. I suppose it would be really useful also to know, so as been pointed out before, that the Waikanae River Trail, for example, goes through Dockland as well as GW. So some of these other trails, well, obviously, as we've heard, some of these other trails aren't owned by us. So it would be nice to know how much money is put in by these other entities as well when we're considering all this.
I think that's a statement rather than a question.
Well, can that information be provided as well, please?
What information are you looking for? I'm sorry. This is a long-term plan briefing.
Yes, so
It's about what we spend.
Yes, that it's true, but it's actually looking at the whole picture. And I suppose also too, tying this in with our CWB work. So it's actually not siloing work, it's actually looking at it, a bigger picture.
So I understand there was a paper that went to your committee a few weeks ago that looked into this. So was that a gap in that presentation?
That was raised at the time as well.
Okay, so we'll bring that potentially back to your committee, but
Yeah.
it's not part of this process.
Yeah. Thank you. So also too with the Mahara Gallery funding, it's my understanding that an MOU was signed this year. Could that be circulated prior to we have the briefing on that?
I don't think the MOU has been signed yet. Is that right, Mike? Until we sort out this whole operational funding scenario. So I'm sure it will be shared once we'd have to sign it off. Shelley?
Just got one more on the Mahara one. You mentioned it sounded like you mentioned this is additional funding to funding they're already getting.
So we've been over this in the
Okay.
last briefing, and
Can-
that information was all given. We're getting a briefing next week.
And it'll
We've
all
got
be,
this slide.
Okay.
I don't want us to get hung up on one line in this slide because we've got a lot of material to get through today. So we'll move on.
Sorry, I've
Thanks,
just
Mark.
got one really quick question for clarity. On the first line, responding to network issues, is that solely related to cars travelling on the road, or is that also the active transport network that's on road as well?
The network is the network is in its entirety, so footpaths, roads, shared paths within the transport sector.
Great, thanks.
So moving on, so these are repeat slides. This slide captured the councillor initiatives. Further work's been done on this. We will continue to include these slides in our presentations just so that you know that we know that they still need to be worked up, but they're going to be brought back on the 28th of November. And similarly, the next slide, this is the initiatives that were raised by the community boards. So they will also be worked up, and more detail will be presented back and tabled on the 28th of November. So they're in there as a placeholder, and it's recapping what we discussed last week. So this is the waterfall chart,
So
which
I do have a question in relation to the community board initiatives. So I'm just checking that staff have received the information that was requested on the Waikanae Beach Hall.
Thanks, Taryn.
Yes, I've got that.
Sorry.
So this is the waterfall chart, which basically shows how we got to the 12%. So that's where we're currently sitting at the moment, and it just shows. So the starting position is the rates revenue for the current financial year of 23-24, and it shows the cost increases to the rates revenue requirement with a few reductions. So you've got your personnel is lifting rates. You've got your depreciation plus the proposed option to reduce depreciation. And then you've got uplift from net interest charges, inflation, the loss of the better or funding that we discussed that we got for the current financial year. There is no tranche 2 funding, so we lose that funding completely, so that does create a hole. And then obviously the new budget bids of $2 million that we've just talked you through gives you a rates revenue requirement of $102.5 million. Less your growth of 0.8% gives you an average rates increase of 12% at this current point in time. One of the things that I haven't really laboured, but it's probably useful to labour today, and it's at the bottom of the slide actually. So we've talked to you about 908,000 as 1% of rates, 454 as 0.5%, and 0.1% as 90,000. And as we take you through the journey, as we hone in on the 30th of June next year, we'll probably be looking at those 0.1%. But what I haven't really laboured is the next column. So it's called non-discretionary increases. In other words, the council has cost increases that it really can't control. And if we look at those type of expenses, we get up to actually a rates increase of 9.6%. How do we do that? So you've got depreciation flowing through.
Sorry, Mark, we went through this at the last briefing, so
Okay.
we'll take the slide as read and
That's
carry on
fine.
to the next one.
And then, so with this slide, we are looking to get from 12 down to 8.86. So we need to go look at our budgets to get to 8.86. $2.8 million needs to be taken out of the budget, or 3.14%. This was the capital works program that we presented last week. This is just at an activity level: 71 million in year 1, 71 million in year 2, $99 million in year 3. There were some queries that were raised around the table, so we've got the responses to those queries and happy to take you through that now. So this will be a new slide that you haven't seen.
Great.
Okay, so the first question was, does the town centres program of $2.38 million in year one include Otaki? Yes, the answer to that is does include Otaki as well as other town centres. The $1.2 million, which sits under community facilities funding contributions, that is for the Parapara Umu College Gym Sports Centre. We were asked, why is there 35,000 in year one, 24,000 in year two for the Paikakiriki Surf Club? And that relates to upkeep of the car parks and surrounding areas. So that's a placeholder budget for that.
Hang on a minute, with that one, I think we need to change in that case what it's called, because that's not for the Paikakiriki Surf Club, that's for coastal maintenance of a car park. Just to avoid that question cropping up again.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Does the community halls include Waikanae Beach Hall? Yes. That amount includes 55,000 for the Waikanae Beach Hall. I think we have a question.
Jocelyn?
Yes, I have two questions. So in relation to those car parks in Paikakiriki, where exactly are they?
I'm presuming they're where the surf club used to be when there was a surf club.
Is there actually a need to upgrade those, to upkeep those car parks in the surrounding areas?
Yeah, that's where people park to swim between the flags in Paikakiriki, because that's still where the Paikakiriki Surf Club operate from containers and put up flags for safe swimming. So people need to park their cars there, which is why we need a car park.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So my next question relates to the Waikanae Beach Hall. So I missed some of this briefing on last Thursday. So this 55K is for what year is that in the long-term plan?
We're just looking at now.
Aren't all the figures we're looking at year one? I would have thought, yep.
And there's currently a much larger amount of money in the budget for this year as well.
So this is for next financial year, is that what you're talking about?
Yes, that's, yes, so,
So next financial year, year one of the long-term plan, is that what you're asking about?
yeah, I'm asking whether it's 1, 2 or 3, or whether,
Is it further on in the slides? Are we going to come to it?
or even if you provide it later on, that'd be fine, thank you.
Yeah, that's what I was
So this
wondering.
is in addition to the amount of money that's in this current budget.
Sorry, I'm just going back to the first question you asked, so which relates to the
you.
slide. So last week we said that community halls had 305,000 in year one, and the question was, does that include the Waikanae
Right,
Beach Hall?
okay.
And the answer to that is yes. Of the 305, it included 55,000 for the Waikanae Beach Hall. The information, we had quite a discussion about the Waikanae Beach Hall, and the information has been provided to the Chief Executive, which will come back at a later date.
Thank you. Thank you. It's just that I'm not sure, well, in fact, the last time I looked, the transcript wasn't online, so it's difficult to...
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Then there was a question about museums and theatres. There's the budget line for museums and theatres and the community facilities, the asset renewal. The question was, what does that relate to? And it's actually mainly the Otaki Museum. What is the Otaki Beach development? That is revamping the area for parking, beach access ways, and new and upgraded amenities. And then lastly, we were asked, why are there still budgets for Ōtoroa Park of 194,000 for year two and 383,000 for year three? And at the moment, it's actually for irrigation and filtration maintenance.
Mark, just a quick question on that. You may have answered the other day and I may have missed it. That seems an awful lot of money for irrigation and filtration. Is that new infrastructure that's being put out there, or is that the maintenance of existing infrastructure?
I'm not too sure, Councillor. We could
It
maybe
seems
ask
a lot.
Mike when he comes
Yeah.
back into the room.
Okay, thank you. This seems a lot to me. A park that's not well used.
I think we could Jocelyn's got another question.
Yeah, thank you. So in relation to the the Otaki beach development, beach accessways, et cetera, I know that we're going through a process of looking at all that. I'm just wondering how money's already been allocated here when we haven't actually landed that strategy or that work.
Look, I'd suggest we ask Mike. Sean might be able to answer that.
So this was discussed last week. This is historically there's been an issue down at the Otaki Beach with the designation of that area, and the designation needed to change from, I think it was actually had no designation because it was accreted. So it was transferred to road, and then the intention was to transfer from road to reserve. That process started some 2014. I say 5, it's normally like 10 years ago. And there was a plan associated with that area that included assets in there and was consulted on, and there was some funding associated with it. This is the funding and the work. We're still working through the process around the land designation.
Thank you, Sean. So again, I'm also aware that we're going through a process of our reserves in terms of doing an omnibus process. This seems to be outside that process, whereas this obviously is a reserve as well. And the work, basically those designations need to be done before any work can be upgraded as part of that omnibus process.
No, this land is a reserve currently. It's not part of the wider work program. They're two separate processes.
So thank you. Moving on to slide number 11, economic development. So last week during our 2 briefings, several councillors did ask what is included in the LTP for economic development, and we said that we would bring that back today. So we'll take you through the detail, but basically in year 1 of the draft long-term plan, there's a budget provision of $1.4 million for economic development initiatives and implementation. Please note that that does not include any change to the way in which the council, or any change to the Wellington NZ funding of 550k. So that's outside of the 1.4 million. Just a note, in terms of strategy and growth, so in terms of the current long-term plan, so the 2141 long-term plan, strategy growth, which is an internal business unit, had a budget reduction of $1.8 million in year 4 of the current long-term plan. So when we went through all the costings, it was decided to reinstate that 1.8 million back into strategy and growth. So the 1.8 million already exists in the current financial year. So it's already included in your rates. So the starting position where we start at the rates revenue requirement of 90 million, the 1.8 million is in there. Of that 1.8 million that has been retained, 1.4 of that has been earmarked for economic development initiatives and implementation. What's important to understand is by retaining that 1.8 million, it's having no impact on rates increases going forward. So it's already within the rates revenue requirement this year.
Liz has her hand up online. Just waiting for the mute button to be deactivated. Can we unmute Liz? Good to go, Liz.
Right, thank you. Sorry, I've had my hand up for a little while.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Look, I'll say a couple of things now, one in retrospect and one in advance. So firstly, in retrospect of our conversation, I know you don't want to dwell on Mahara, but I do want to make the point that I sit on the Mahara board as the council representative, and we have done some extremely intense work over the last year on positioning that and coming up with a business model that works for everybody, and you'll find out about that next week. So basically going forward, council will maintain control over the finances. There'll be, discussion, there will be a joint board that's being proposed where there's input from the gallery, but pretty much it's council money and under council control. And of course, we'll be monitoring the benefits that we receive from the expenditure. So the whole performance of the gallery will be monitored quite closely to see that we're getting our money's worth back out of it. Or else we will obviously have to change tax. So I just want to reassure those councillors who are concerned about the money side of things that there are plans in place, which you'll find out about next week. And secondly, I'll say, I'll make a comment in advance about economic development while I've got the floor. And that is, there's two comments that pertain to slides coming up. One is around the cost of setting up the trust. I need to know more details around that. And secondly, in relation to the major events fund, we didn't actually fully allocate the major events money in the last round. In my mind, that whole fund needs a rethink in terms of how it's managed and what projects are eligible. And what I would prefer to see, rather than increasing that fund, is to have an allocation of money to what I would call innovative projects that have benefits beyond just one organisation. So, for example, in the way that we gave $50,000 to the Bond Store to create a logistics hub for the food and beverage sector, I think similarly there are other kind of innovative or developmental projects that can take place within the business community that may be a better use of money than just throwing things at a whole lot of events, especially when there are issues around some of those events that we've been funding. So just wanted to flag that as you come up into that discussion. That's all I wanted to say for now, but if you wouldn't mind just keeping an eye on my hand being raised. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know why I didn't spot it. Thanks, that's really useful input, Liz. Cool. Let's move on. Richard.
Am I correct in thinking that the budget for the money from economic development comes from a targeted commercial rate, and therefore, if you drop the funding for economic development, it's really only commercial people who are going to benefit? Now, I'm happy with that, but it's not going to be a lifesaver for the average ratepayer. Is that correct?
So thank you. So in terms of the overall budgets for economic development, some of it is funded through a targeted commercial rate, but not all. Yeah, absolutely. We can bring that back, and that will be part of the rating system review as well.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So moving forward, so now we're getting into the detail of what's in the $1.4 million for the economic development initiatives and implementation. Chris isn't here with us today, but Darren is very kindly here, and I'm going to actually hand over to Darren just to present the next two slides to you as we go through the details of what's in the economic development space. Thanks, Darren.
Thank you. So what this, I suppose this is a full breakdown of the operating budget for economic development. It shows the different initiatives. So some are new, and some are a continuation of existing work. In terms of some of the ones on this page, you'll see things like the continuation of the work around the destination story. So it's making sure that we can continue on with the work that we're doing this year to develop that and make sure we don't lose momentum when those things are put forward. In terms of things like the ED Company Board Trust, So that's not just for the establishment of the trust, it's also the cost for the ongoing operation of the trust. It also includes their project work. So that isn't new money as such, it's a partial reallocation of the existing money that they receive already for that work and activity. There is money there for a special purpose vehicle, and that's the idea of things like a food hub or those sorts of things that would sit under the trust as an investment or a sort of a commercial sort of play to actually look at how to create a return from economic development activities, as well as supporting those. In terms of the multi-day trails, the feasibility study, that's looking at the economic opportunity from trails and the opportunity to grow the economic return from those and look for new business opportunities. And the Māori ED and wellbeing strategy, our current one's 2013, so it's very old and now very out of date, and I need to actually focus on working with with iwi to make sure we have a current and relevant strategy in that space. Happy to take questions.
I know it's not economic development, so it's not on this slide. Where did we get to with medium-sized community events? Is anybody in the room that can answer that?
That was a piece of work that was sitting with the
People and Partnerships team?
yeah.
So
What
that's
we-
something we've been asking for 5 years or more. I'm just with the major events being increased by 80K, I'm just wondering what kind of budget we've allocated to that.
What we did do with major
I
events
know
is
it's not on this, it's not, the whole thing is it's not economic development.
we did provide a budget to support business, the events that are trying to grow.
Yeah, that's a different
Yeah.
story, yeah.
Thanks,
you answer?
Madam. Yes, I do know because it came up in the annual plan for 22-23 as a new initiatives, and it was 30,000 allocated to medium-sized events, and we were looking at roughly about $5,000 per event, and that has been budgeted in the place and space under the marketing and events team. So we do have the 30,000 because it was part of the annual plan process we had. Yeah.
Okay, so that's going to be rolled out in this financial year then?
Yes, we carried on the budget as such.
Yeah, so the budget's there,
It
it just
is.
needs to be implemented. Great. Phase one complete anyway, and just making sure that that stays in the budget. I think it should be 50,000. I think 30,000, particularly if we're going to increase major events by 80. And 5,000 really barely pays for a road, a traffic plan. So maybe flag that for a further discussion when we talk about that topic. Kathy?
Thank you. Just wondering, and maybe I should know this, but in the past, we used to fund the Major Events Fund for 3 years, and then they were standalone. Is that still the case, or do we just keep funding and funding and funding the same organisation, or whoever puts on the event?
Darren's going to respond to that.
So in our last review of the major events policy, that was changed because we found that events weren't able to, as they continue to grow, they still did need support from council. It was also a good thing in terms of their ability to leverage other funding support as well. And so that rule was changed so that there isn't a 3-year only period.
I think it was also, to add to that, I think it was also identified that events that are being delivered for free, and Cam would know all about this, how are they meant to be sustainable when they don't have a ticketing revenue stream? Even if numbers grow, it just costs more, it doesn't earn more. So it depends on the event. Some events would be able to be sustainable after a period of time, and others, it's just not realistic.
And we do work with events to encourage them to seek and support them through that process. And a lot of the times over that 3-year period, we do have diminishing levels of sponsorship. So it starts at a higher level and then does decrease over time as well.
I just know that sometimes you have to pay, to get in the gate. So, yeah, that was all. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. It's a good question because a lot of major events policies do have that in place, and it was quite a substantial discussion at the time to decide that we would sometimes require that, and sometimes we'd be more flexible about it. Lawrence?
Just question, why are we increasing major events funding by 80K?
Because they're fun?
Um,
No, Darren's going to answer.
So-
I
so-
was just
so
waiting
major
for the
events.
microphone, filling in time.
And major events are obviously an important thing for attracting people into the district. It is an area where there is a number of the events operators are under increasing pressure in terms of cost going up, and so there's always a fine balance in terms of the level of commitment we can spread across the mix. There's also a desire to actually attract some new events to the district. We've been sponsoring sort of the similar ones for a period of time, and there is a desire to see if we can actually attract some bigger new events to add some vibrancy to the event sector.
I just, I guess my question is birthed out of, I don't think we distributed that full fund last financial year, so just asks a question as to why we're increasing it when we're not distributing it anymore. And isn't the amount that we contribute to an event capped?
Yep, so there's different levels of sponsorship for major events, and so that can range between 40 to 50 to 20 or $10,000. In terms of the team had been working with a number of different parties to look at new events, such as in the food and beverage space, to support that activity. So it's been trying to the team's been trying to work with the event sector in terms of new events that could be coming to the area. And we can provide more detail as part of our future briefing in terms of that.
Lawrence, did you have anything else to say about that? Your light's still on. And after Lawrence, I've got Glenn, and then Jocelyn, and then I've got Liz on Zoom.
Probably have a little bit of a concern about an increase of budget in the hope of when we're tightening everywhere else, that's all, and didn't expend it last time fully. I get why events are important, and I get that they are important to our district. That flags me a little bit that we've increased it when we didn't spend it last year, and we've got hope, I guess. I'm just commenting.
I think that's a really good point. I think every increase in budgets this time round, based on our introduction from the Chief Executive at our first briefing, needs to be robustly defended and clearly identified the benefits and why we're doing it. Glenn?
Yeah, I concur with Lawrence's take on that. Just a quick question around Māori ED and wellbeing strategy. Is that an outcome-based strategy, or is the money, I got the indication that is money going just to build capacity within Māori ED as opposed to driving outcome-based stuff? And I haven't looked at the strategy, so I don't know. It's just a question. Is it capacity building within iwi, or is it actually outcome-based, is the question?
I suppose in terms of the scope of that strategy, it hasn't been worked through yet. That would need to be a conversation that we would have to work through in terms of discussion with iwi and other parties. That the current one was quite the current one's 2013, so it's really old. And I don't think it's relevant in terms of the current environment and what's happening. So then,
I'd just like to add, though, more generally, the money that we invest in Māori economic development has paid huge dividends in the past. For instance, it's how Māoriland got going. The rongoā practitioners that operate across the coast and are becoming, really successful businesses, that kind of thing. So it has been successful, but building that structure around what's already kind of up and running and successful, I think, is probably what we're trying to do. Would that be right, Darren?
that's correct.
Yeah. Glenn, did you have something else?
Comment on the back end of that. I don't particularly have any issues with it, but I would just like to see it be outcome focused with a KPI, as with all of them, not only for that one, I'm not singling out that one, but the rest of them appear to be KPI or outcome focused, and I think that should as well.
absolutely.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you.
So could I ask elected members to please, when you've asked your question, leave your microphone on in case you have a follow-up, and
Don't
then
get
when
turned
you've
off.
finished your line of questioning, then turn it off to save us going backwards and forwards. Staff are doing really well to keep up, but just make it a bit easier. Jocelyn, and then Liz.
Yeah, thank you. So this is sort of a higher level question in relation to economic development. So I see that the strategy was from 2020 to 2023. So it's actually run out, and I'm just wondering where all these initiatives are coming from when there's actually been no work spent on a strategy. That's my first question. Current strategy.
Do you understand the question, Darren? Yep.
So the current strategy is, well, there's a current refresh underway in terms of the ED strategy, and there's a briefing on the 21st of November where the board will be coming to update in terms of the ED strategy refresh, and that'll include a sort of a discussion around the different activities and different sort of items. So a lot of these reflect the direction of the strategy.
Thank you for that, Darren. So my other question too is, I know that previously when the ED team have come along to talk to us, there's been quite a lot of discussion about education and about business opportunities. I'm not really seeing that in here, and I'm just wondering how this all fits together.
Isn't there a briefing coming up, an update on the economic development strategy? And I know we've got Liz coming up next. She might be able to have a little comment around that too.
There is a
So-
second slide.
There's a second slide on this?
Yep.
Liz, do you want to comment now, or do you want to wait till the second slide? Do you want to comment now? Yep, you're up.
Yeah, look, I'll just say a couple of things. Firstly, just coming back to major events, I sit on the major events panel, and we had a debrief at the end of the last round, and I put forward a whole lot of concerns around the process. And my understanding was that we were going to review the whole major events, process, how it works. I don't know what's happened in the interim, but it's something certainly needs to happen before we run another one. Just want to reiterate that. And yes, as far as education is concerned, there's some really exciting things happening on that front. Through the EDKB, and that's included in the strategy going forward. It's a major thrust for the next 12 months or next couple of years, really, to get something off the ground there. So, look, I just want to say that we're on the cusp of some really cool things coming through from the EDKB, and this is all money that's well spent, in my view, and there's a lot more that we could do with a bit of extra funding. And I just want to reiterate that rather than increase the major events fund, I'd like to see some innovative projects being funded, because I think those are the sort of things that can spark a whole lot of other stuff happening within our business community.
So to summarise the feedback, we've got a few question marks around that increase in major events. We want to see, from what Liz said, we need to see a little bit more information about the process around major events. We want to see what that would potentially fund, or what opportunities there, tangible opportunities there are. From my comment, we could look at community events, because wellbeing is a really important thing in our community at the moment. And from what Liz said, looking at redirecting that into other economic development activity in the business space. And I'd just like to say too that I'd like to back up what Liz said about putting money into this area, because we did have that conversation at the last briefing about having a long-term view of this spending. What spending is going to have long-term positive impact that will reduce rates in the longer term through investing smartly and wisely. So we've got that kind of lens that we're looking at things through as well. So Jocelyn, I'll come back to you. Is this still around the same?
Yeah, it is. It's just that
Is the next slide going to help, maybe?
Yeah, so as I was mentioning before, I know that business and education were sort of two key cornerstones in this area. But unless the education is tied up to youth development and employment, I can't actually see that in this list of initiatives.
So the youth development and employment. So there's definitely investment there in terms of things like Work Ready Kapiti and other programs. In terms of the previous slide, in terms of the trust board, part of the investment from there is in terms of education hub work that's ongoing. And part of the way that the board operates is that we don't just rely on council funding, we also leverage other funding as well. So that's where we seek support from Wellington NZ and other entities and stuff like that. So a big way that we try and use the ED money is to leverage every dollar we invest. So trying to get at least $1 or $2 more from every dollar at least that we invest, so that we can make these bigger projects happen.
On page 12, at some point I'd be interested to know a little bit more detail around the website for tourism and the marketing and tourism lines there in terms of what they would be spent on.
Yep, so one of the things that we'll be doing in the briefing next week is talking a bit more about the destination story work and the steps from there, and we'll be providing more discussion and engagement with council about that.
Just got a comment from the Chief Executive around some of this in terms of budgeting and etc.
This is really good discussion. I just want to highlight that this money that we are talking about is not new money. This is currently budgeted, and it's about how we are reallocating the budget to meet what we took from the previous discussion, what a focus for us might be in the ED space. So this is not additional money, this is currently budgeted, and we're just sharing with you what we are looking to do and reallocating. So just need you to be aware of that. It's not new money, has no impact on rates.
I think that's a very useful clarification at this point. Thanks, Darren. Shelley?
For me, it's good to see that there's the word trails in there for our feasibility study. But it would be really good to know how the CWB and the network fits into all of this, because it fits in. You can put the destination story work on the CWB network. We attract people here that can go. So I would like to see that when you bring back your economic development, because to me it's very important in the economic development of the district. But we're not seeing it really reflected here.
Yep, so definitely we will be back with more. We do see the connection. Obviously there's that amazing foundation to work from, and it's the ability to say, well, what can we connect into that to create economic opportunity and make sure the tracks and that sort of thing is more sustainable going forward. So there'll be more discussion. We're working with the parks team as well to make sure it's a joined up, and transport team as well to make sure it's a joined up process. Yep.
Will you come and talk to the advisory group about how that's all going to connect in? Cool.
Thanks, Shelley. Sophie?
Just a couple of quick questions about the ED Kapiti Board Trust, so probably for Darren. And to the Chief Executive's point around the reallocation of funding within ED, so because this is tagged as new, where's the funding being reallocated from for this specific initiative? As in, what's it been prioritised over?
So there is money already set aside for the existing economic development Kotaitanga model, and so the majority of that money comes from that. So it's basically going from the existing board approach to the trust. So in theory, the new's not quite right. The new element would be the special purpose vehicle. Yeah, yeah. So that's definitely a new thing in terms of a more commercial targeted opportunity.
Oh, sorry, just one more question on that. So what would the $228,000 actually cover? Is that the establishment of the Kotahitanga board as a trust? Would it essentially cost that much to establish it as a trust, or what will that pay for?
So that covers the ongoing operations in terms of the trustee fees and all those sorts of things. It covers they've got a budget for projects, so they invest in different projects. So they invested in the initial work we did around food and beverage and the education hub. So that money is all part of the 228. So it's not for the establishment, it's for the ongoing activities of the trust board.
So, Darren, I'm aware that you're answering questions from over there and half the councillors have their back to you.
Yep. And
we've got a couple more to go, I think. Do you want to come up? Sorry, it's a bit late in the piece, but we'll start as we mean to go on. When we get to infrastructure, we'll get Sean up. Martin is next.
Yeah. Thanks for the clarity from the CE with regards to how this isn't new money and its allocation. So if it's an allocation thing, I just wanted to drop, not changes in, but just support some of the views that have happened here. I note that there's some trust situations we're developing. I'm picturing that one of the reasons we're using these trust formats is so we can leverage funding opportunities through these trusts.
That's correct.
Yeah, lovely. Yep. Great to see that moving in that direction. Look, I also take note of what Liz was talking about with regards to innovation, having some money there for innovation projects and an innovation fund as such, maybe tying in with regards to what's available through the major events funds, because also taking on board what the Mayor was saying, there has been conversation about those midway community, should we say, not-for-profit events that can be put on. And sometimes, I think the Kite Festival is an excellent example of that. Investing in something like that can bring a huge amount of people to the area, where some of these one-off events can be kept quite restrictive on the numbers that are coming through as well. So, no, quite happy with the way that's going. But just that reviewing the major events fund and how we address events or development of events, even the Christmas parade that we're talking about coming up. I'm quite looking forward to that conversation and how that might look. I remember when that first came through, Jeepers Creepers, must have been 8 years ago, sitting down and we were discussing that even then, of where does those smaller ones fit in, and we were even told then that we'll get to that one, but we're quite a way down the trail with regards to that. So good to see it being talked to, and very happy with the way these allocations are looking.
Bede.
Yeah, thank you. Couple of questions. Just following up on Councillor Hanford's question, the Edie Kapiti Board Trust. What is the current budget allocation for the EDKB?
I'd have to come back to you on that.
Okay.
We'll have to come back to you.
All right. Yep. In terms of the special purpose vehicle, so my understanding of the new structure, which is pretty sound, I think, is that it allows the trust to establish multiple special purpose vehicles. Is that $100,000, is that likely to be a standard cost of any new SPV, or is that specific to this one?
I suppose at the moment it's based on what we know. At the moment, it's it's the cost of establishing that and putting it into play, and it's based around the current model that we're looking at.
Yep.
We would need to look at other models to see what the cost of those would be. But part of the purpose of these vehicles is to actually create income and revenue so that they become self-sustaining.
Yep.
So it's not a situation of us continuing to fund them.
Yep.
They should be funding themselves over time.
Yep. So do you see that as an investment rather than a sunk cost?
Yep. Yep.
Cool. Thank you.
That's a great way to put it, actually. An investment rather than a sunk cost. So we're ready to move on, are we? Is that Darren off the hook or more?
No, there's
Still more.
There's one more slide on the detail behind what's in economic development, which is on the screen now.
What page is it now?
It is on page 13. So if you just want to talk
Right.
So this page again is a mixture of existing and some slight changes in terms of activities, in terms of education and youth development. That's a big focus in terms of workforce. It doesn't just focus on young people though. It also work with older people and people with disabilities as well. We've also allocated some money in terms of the startup ecosystem, and there'll be more sort of discussion about that with council. And then sort of the activities around sustainable business, ongoing business capability support, and visitor attraction.
Jocelyn.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the last line, research. What is, what sort of activities will be funded in that area?
So the primary thing we invest in there is Infometrics. So they provide sort of ongoing data through the year in terms of economic data that we use.
Thank you.
I'm just interested in both pages because I was able to turn. Visitor attraction, marketing tourism, website for tourism, destination cavity story. Isn't that all just one big lump? And you go from, or are these individual projects? And because visitor attraction and a website all seems to be the same thing to me. Maybe I'm not tourism minded, but just like different words for the same thing.
So visitor attraction is more about the work we're doing to grow the tourism sector. So that's in terms of the work around the destination management plan and the delivery of that. And so there's a variety of activities there in terms of how we work with industry and all those sorts of things that are funded through that one. In terms of marketing, there's a whole variety of marketing activities that we do during the year that we, invoke different campaigns and all those sorts of things. We have been keen to keep a separate budget in terms of the destination story because we see that as quite a key piece of work that we need to make sure that we can continue to, or that we will make sure we hero and champion going forward. And there is a significant investment required in terms of the work we're doing to build that story this year and make sure we can really sort of leverage that going forward. Sponsorship, that's where we sponsor things like the business awards and all those sorts of things. So all slightly different in terms of their application and usage. Yeah. And websites, the cost of, the ongoing license and access and all that sort of thing to the website. So that's,
So how's all this work going in terms of outcomes and increased business, increased visitor numbers? And are we going to tell that story through the consultation document?
I suppose, so as part of the consultation processes or the work early next year, we will be telling the story about the outcomes from the first ED strategy or the current ED strategy and the work in terms of the refresh. And so part of that will be telling the story about what's been happening, what the outputs and outcomes are, and where we're going to for going forward, sort of thing. So yes, we will be telling the story in terms of to date and what's happening.
And we'll find out more about this next week, is that right?
Yeah, so there's a briefing on the 21st of November. So there's a briefing in terms of the refresh. And then on the 7th of December, we're bringing the direction of travel, which is the precursor in terms of the ED strategy for inclusion in the consultation process.
Fantastic. Jocelyn?
Yeah, so just a couple of comments that have been made in relation to the Kapiti destination story. Here it says continuation. So I thought only 150K had been allocated to that process. Has more money been spent on that up until now?
So we've had 150,000 allocated in this financial year. And so there's it's work involved in terms of getting that brand and story all set up. And so the work in terms of next year is more about the telling the story and making sure we can actually push the brand out there and stuff like that. So it's, there's one thing to develop it, there's another thing to really make sure we push it and make sure we can campaign those sorts of things.
Thank you for that, but I thought, and correct me if I was wrong, that the sole amount was 150k?
So that's the amount that's been allocated in this current financial year for this work.
Well, when Te Urahi was cancelled, I thought the amount was 150k.
Is that
So is this a
That's
different?
what, so that's what's allocated this year, and we've put in the budget for the next year, 150,000 to make sure we can continue the momentum of that work.
So that's more than 150k that's going to be spent on this. So we
Yep.
approved 150k, but there's more money being spent in this area.
Yep, I suppose what we're proposing is that what we want to do is ensure that the investment that's made by council in this current financial year is leveraged and capitalised on going forward.
Liz. Online. If we could unmute her.
Thank you. Yes, look, the 150k came about this year because we committed as a council to the objectives of Te Urahi going forward, which were telling the Kapiti story and also telling that iwi story, if you like, the history of mana whenua, and I think it was the other one, there was three things. Anyway, that's not a one-off process. Te Urahi was meant to be an ongoing, lasting project. We're going to build it and it's going to be ongoing, to tell the story. The stories of Kapiti and iwi and Kapiti Island was the other one. So it was never intended to be just a one-off thing. We have ongoing obligations to follow through on that, and I think it's entirely appropriate that we have money for all those things going forward. And potentially if we're renovating the Otaki Museum in this next LTP, it would be great to see some work around the history of mana whenua included in that project, for example, and also in the library community centre and what have you. So, I'm going to make sure that we live up to those promises that we made, and none of them are one-offs, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
So just a further question, and hopefully it'll come out when we have our briefing. So I'd be really interested to know how that 150k, as a result of Te Urahi not being completed or not going ahead, is being spent in this financial year, please.
You're getting a nod here at the end of the table. We'll have an answer to that. Great. I think we can move on. What have we got next?
The financial strategy.
Oh, would now be a good time to take a little break
Sure.
before we move on to the financial strategy. So we can come to the numbers with a clear head and a fresh coffee.